Alright, so check it out. I very much idolize the works of Joe Rogan, and being such a fanboy of him, of course I'm going to be an absolute follower of his podcasts. Just because I'm such a fan of the insight and the interactions and attention to detail as far as picking the guests that appear on his show. And I'm gonna need you guys to bear with me for a sec because I originally was not gonna do an intro piece to this one, but after certain things being brought to my attention, not to my attention, but to my memory and consciousness, I could only think, of a few things that would make it fitting to use as an intro for this. And I promise you, I was not going to make an intro to this because I'm not a big fan of repeating myself, of repeating a routine or a rubric or a template or whatever. But I did want to say this. Just bear with me for a sec because it's all going to lead up to something. It may not be relevant, but it is leading up to something. A few nights ago, I was watching the last Fight Companion, which I believe was on December the 3rd. Yesterday was December the 13th, so I watched it 10 days late or whatnot. But I like being kept up to date with those ones because sometimes they go off on these tangents of like some really interesting stuff, and it's more than anything, it's pretty funny to watch. But also, being such a devoted disciple of the sport of MMA, of course I'm gonna soak up whatever insight those guys can bring in. But and just in general, everything from the vast knowledge to the comedy and the expressionism from Brian Callum and Brendan Schaub and everything down to some of the funny conspiracies of Eddie Bravo, which totally makes sense to me. I can understand why somebody would be that engulfed in it. Why not? Yesterday, in listening to the Fight Companion podcast, Joe Rogan was saying something, started talking about his college years, about how he really hadn't become that invested in it until he started approaching it from a different perspective. Ultimately, to him, he got a kick out of going to college, simply for the fact that he liked sitting in the classrooms and waiting for some of the quote-unquote smart kids to challenge the teacher, to start asking questions about whatever the lesson was, and challenging whatever the materials was about, what the current module in the curriculums was. And so, in listening to that, it brought back so many flashbacks, so many things that I related to when in hearing that. Because when I was in school, when I started realizing, at one point in grade school, I must have been like, in grade 3 or grade 4, I must have been like 8 or 9 years old when the teacher made a comment about, teachers are human too. Of course they make mistakes when trying to teach you things, and they're not always right when trying to teach you something. But in their mind, because they outsmarted anybody, nobody's ever going to take the time to work the solutions to the problems out in their head and call them out on it. Therefore, they have no choice but to put total faith in that what the teachers are giving out is the truth, and they have to put the trust in their teachers that what they're trying to teach is accurate, even if it's not always so. And in hearing that, ever since, it was never good enough for me. Whenever a teacher was teaching something, sometimes they would put out, their formula was to give a written explanation, a textbook definition of what the lesson was, and then put up an example, later followed by a assortment of problems to figure out. And so to me, so say for instance, Like just straight out of example. The teacher would be giving a lesson on multiplication. And so she would say, when you multiply, you take the first number, and it's basically like you're writing the first number as many times as the number that follows it. And then she would, let's say for instance, I don't know if that's a confusing way of wording it, but, that's, let's just, for example. And then she would write down at the bottom, say 3 times 4 is 12. And so she would write the whole thing out, and then she would point to the 4, and she'd be like, and she would say, if you were to take 4 apples 3 times, repeat the 4 apples 3 times, it would give you 12. And so then she would go down at the bottom of the board, and then she would write out a few equations without the solution, or she would write out the questions without the product or whatever. And so it would be us. It would be up to us to figure out the answers to the questions or whatever. And that's usually how it's done in schools. I don't know if I'm just botching it there or whatever, but that's how it was for me. And so, but once I knew that piece of information, I had to absolutely challenge everything in my mind. It wasn't good enough for me to listen to somebody tell me that that's what it was, that what the right answer is. I had to find out for myself. If the teacher's example was that 4 times 3 is 12, I would go on my little book or whatever and take my little pencil and start. I want to make 4 lines, and I would make 4 lines 3 times, and then literally count the lines one by one and make sure it all added up to 12. And only then would I be sure that what the teacher is telling me is true. And that's how, I would literally challenge everything that they would be putting up on those boards. And sure enough, what the teacher said was true, that a lot of times they'll fuck up, but because nobody stops to challenge them, and it was true. Like, it wasn't a whole lot of times, maybe like 8 to 10% of the time something would be off, and I would literally call them out on it. I was that one little piece of shit kid that was just out to make the teacher look bad on any given day because I wanted to prove that they were wrong. And sometimes I would make myself look stupid because I would try to call them out and I'd be like, no, trust me, you're not right. Quit trying to be a piece of shit. That's not right the way you did it. And then I would redo it and I'd find out that I wasn't right. And I just made myself like a total ass. So, all in all, I think it's a pretty important thing to challenge everything you're being taught, so that you're learning to discover things for yourself. Further along, I started applying that to everything I did. In science class, when they taught you, when they started trying to teach you that the blueness in the ocean was really just a reflection on how bright the sky was, or vice versa. And so I went home and literally took like a bowl of water and took a reflector glass and all this bunch of stuff. And I remember, I forget how I did the experiment exactly, but it turned out being true and all this stuff. And then later on, like challenging how the electricity stuff works, when we started learning about electricity in junior high, and, so on and so forth. And even further in my life, I ended up challenging a lot of what had been taught. When I learned that there was corruption and human manipulation with what ancient scripture, what is now perceived as sacred scriptures, all of a sudden I start challenging everything. Eventually, I ended up still having strong faith in what I believe in and all that stuff. I had to challenge a lot of it. And even so, one of my first few podcasts on this channel, I kept telling you, challenge what you think you know, or challenge what you believe in. Challenge your faith, because only then will you know if you really believe in it. Only then will you find out if what you believe is true, if what you think exists actually exists. And so I did that, and I got my answer. Now, I'm not going to start preaching to you guys, because that's not what this is about. I know what is real to me, and I know what is, all in all, it's because I had to challenge it. I have to really find out for myself if it was true, even if it's not real to somebody else, but it's real for me. But the point of this is not about what I found to be real. The point of this whole thing is to challenge everything so that you figure out for yourself what really works or what really is real. Like, learn the facts is what I'm saying. Don't learn the curriculum because, you know, somebody wants you to learn something a certain way. You know, a good example of that is I had a boss a long time ago who's came into work one day and told a story of how his 7-year-old daughter is in grade 2, and she took this test where all her answers were right, and she did the work and stuff. Every single one of her answers was right. However, she only scored a 5 out of 20 on her test, and it was because her answers was right, but the way she showed the work was not the way that the teacher had you know, she didn't do it step for step the way the teacher had did it. And then they made her take the test again. She showed that she had learned the method that was in the curriculum. However, she found it way more effective to do it the way she had done it in the original test. And so they basically gave her shit. They called her parents in and telling her to basically to be a brainwashed minion. She had to follow the curriculum the way it's said, otherwise she's not gonna pass the class, yada yada yada. Basically saying that she can't be smarter than the system. Fuck you, system. Fuck the man. This is what I'm always telling you guys. Challenge what everybody thinks is the norm. I know a guy who actually had a really good result on a very controversial form of meeting and finding courtship. Now, that's a really fancy way of saying he actually lucked out on using online dating on an online dating site. Nathan Higgins is my coworker, and he moved here to Vancouver from Victoria. I'm not exactly sure how long ago, but he's been working in the company for just over a year now, and he really did luck out. It wasn't the typical story of like he was just some pervert little kid looking for a quick hookup on one of these dating sites and all this mumbo jumbo. He actually ended up meeting his now fiance, and they're great. They're doing amazing. He's living the life that he was hoping for when signing up for a membership to the particular site and stuff. So it shows that he challenged the stereotype. It's such a normal thing now for those sites really just to be another booty call site or another there's really no difference between POF and the back page escort site. There's maybe the only difference is that you have to pay for one and not the other. So I was never into that, and I'm not gonna condone anybody that's into that stuff and does it on a regular, because that's not what this is about. If you like doing that, then by all means continue doing it. The whole point of this is to Nathan's story and seeing how it was exactly that he was able to get an actual decent result from finding his soulmate, I guess, through online and all that good stuff.